Welcome to RuralStrong, where we talk real challenges and bold solutions in rural economic development. I'm your host, Joe Barker. Let's get into it. Welcome to the birth of RuralStrong. Today's podcast comes to you from the Southwest Tennessee Development District podcast studio in beautiful downtown Jackson, Tennessee. This is the podcast that brings you strategies, best practices, and real success stories in rural economic and community development. I'm Joe Barker, and I'm the Executive Director of Southwest Tennessee Development District, and this is our venture into the podcast world. Something I truly believe in is the fact that rural communities can succeed, and they should succeed if they follow basic principles. And so the podcast will focus on rural economic and community development. Certainly, we will have several people from the state of Tennessee as our guest, but we want to have guests from all across the nation. We want guests that can speak about best practices, about success stories. And as you listen to the podcast, if you've got comments or you've got a suggestion on something a subject that you would like us to talk about on RuralStrong, we've got an email address, and it is simply ruralstrong@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, love to get feedback from you, and again, we would love to hear from folks all across the country. Now, in today's first broadcast, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background, and I promise you this is the last time you're going to hear this, because we're going to have folks as our guests that are very experienced economic development professionals, local elected officials. So certainly this podcast is not about me, even though I will be your host. But to give you a little bit about my background, I grew up and lived most of my life in rural West Tennessee, in a small town, Savannah, Tennessee, which at that time had a population of about 7,500 souls, and the county, which is Hardin County, had a total population of around 25,000. And I grew up there, I went to high school there, I was in business there for several years, and that's where I got involved in local government. Now, a little bit about my background. As I mentioned, I am the Executive Director of Southwest Tennessee Development District, which is a regional development organization located in Jackson, Tennessee. I've been here for almost 18 years now, and we work in economic and community development with 8 counties and 35 cities. And we try to partner and collaborate with those communities on helping them become more successful and build the foundation for successful economic and community development. Almost 5 decades ago, I was elected a city councilman in the city of Savannah, and after that, I became the mayor of Savannah, Tennessee, and then I don't know if I graduated upward or downward, but I became the county mayor of Hardin County, Tennessee, and yes, in Tennessee, we do have county mayors. After 2 terms as county mayors, which covered 8 years, I had the good fortune of becoming the Assistant Commissioner at the Department of Economic and Community Development for the state of Tennessee, where I served for almost 5 years and worked with rural communities all across the state of Tennessee. I left that position to become Executive Director of Tennessee Tomorrow, which was a brainchild of our governor at that time. He wanted to form a public-private partnership that focused on rural economic development, and he asked me if I would assume that role, and I was honored to do so. After being in that position for a period of time, I had the opportunity to return to my roots in rural West Tennessee and become the executive director at Southwest Tennessee Development District. But while serving as assistant commissioner for the state of Tennessee ECD, I was also the governor's alternate to the Appalachian Regional Authority and also the governor's alternate to the Delta Regional Authority. Both positions I enjoyed immensely. I got to meet fellow economic development practitioners from all across the country, and I had the good fortune of seeing the things that worked, best practices that were put in place, and then I saw a lot of things that I think that rural communities should avoid. I also had the privilege of serving on the Community Development Advisory Board for the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, and enjoyed that position as we talked about housing and poverty in rural areas and how we attack those challenges. So that's a little bit about my background, and again, I promise you we're not going to go through this in future podcasts, but I did want you to know where I come from, and I have a passion for rural economic and community development. Now, in future podcasts, as we kick this off, we're going to have some professionals that's going to talk about some success stories, primarily in rural West Tennessee. We're going to talk about how local leadership, and that's where I'm talking about local elected officials, play a key role in the success or failure of rural communities. Also, we're going to talk in depth about collaboration, how the locals, those on the state level and those on the federal level, must collaborate together for projects that are meaningful to rural communities. You know, most rural communities just simply do not have the tax base, the revenue that is needed to do a lot of things on their own. So it must be a collaborative effort between the locals, the state, and the federal entities to have these projects made viable from a financial standpoint. And again, we want to focus on success stories. We want to hear about stories that where a rural community has done something visionary, something outside the box, that we can all take from that some examples of what we can do in our local communities. You know, in my years of serving in local government, serving in economic community development on both the state and regional level, I can honestly say the best ideas that I got came from communities and leaders who had been there and done that, and I think you understand what I'm talking about. And we're going to talk about best practices. You know, economic and community development in rural communities is simply putting the pieces of the puzzle together. If you can imagine a puzzle sitting in front of you that has lots of pieces, and you know, you can put it together, but if you've got a couple of pieces that are missing, you're not going to get the true picture. And I'm a firm believer that you must look at all aspects of economic and community development to make your rural community successful. Now, what are some of those puzzle pieces? Well, we all know that recruiting manufacturing jobs is at the top of the list. Not only recruiting, but retaining manufacturing jobs. And over the course of the next several months, we're going to be talking a lot about how to recruit manufacturing jobs and best practices. In my community in rural West Tennessee, tourism was very important. And I think sometimes rural communities, they get all caught up in their zeal to recruit that industry, that they can see that big building on the side of the road and say, look what we did. And all that is fine and good, but many of our assets lend more to tourism-related activities. And I hope to share some of my experiences in the tourism recruiting realm and how that can make your rural community successful. Retail development. I probably get as many questions from rural communities about how do we recruit retail. And again, retail development, there's a science to it. You know, some communities want that fast food franchise that only comes to a community with 50,000 people and they have 5,000 people. You've got to have a strategy, and we're going to talk about retail development. Another thing that we were successful in my community is retiree recruitment. There's a lot of us baby boomers out there. A lot of us have retired. We're looking for places to live. We're looking for quality of life. We're looking for health care. And, you know, lots of times just want to get out of the city. So I think an overlooked part of rural economic and community development is the recruitment of retirees. Workforce. You know, we can't recruit anybody if we don't have the folks to fill the jobs. So workforce is highly important as we develop that strategy. And again, in future broadcasts, we're going to be talking about the workforce and some of the keys to making that workforce into the type of workforce that we can recruit, the type of jobs that we want in our community. And over the last few years, and I would say especially since COVID, we've seen how important child care is. And that child care certainly relates to the workforce, because we have a lot of folks who absolutely just cannot get back in the workforce because they can't afford child care, or child care is not available. So that's another subject that we're going to be talking about as some of the pieces of the puzzle in economic and community development in rural communities. Now today I'm not going to get into the weeds, but I am going to just, I hope, set the stage for future broadcast. And one of the things I wanted to talk about today, and each of these topics at a future podcast, we will go into in depth. But I think any organization, whether it's local government, whether it's your chamber of commerce, your economic development organization, if it is separate from your chamber of commerce, to be successful, you've got to build a strong foundation. You know, many times when I speak to groups, I speak about rural economic development. It's like building a house. And if you look at the roof as being the jobs created that you want to create in your community, many times what we do as local leaders is focus on the roof and forget about the foundation. So to me, you've got to build the foundation first, and then you can build the walls and that roof to be successful. Now, I think there's a few things that go into building that strong foundation. One is local governance. And, you know, I've seen elected officials come and go for many years, and I've always been amazed at how some small communities seem to thrive with what looks like very few assets to build upon. And most of the time is because strong local leadership. Now, what sets that strong local leadership apart is their vision for their community and their ability to translate that vision into their employees and into the citizens that they serve. You know, a vision, number one, is that thought process of what you would like your community to be in the future. And you take that vision and put it together with an action plan, and most of the time you can be successful. A vision without action is only a dream, and I think many times our rural communities have a dream. They have a vision, but they don't know how to put the action plan together. So, to build that strong foundation, you must have strong local governance with a vision, and sometimes, with that vision, you have to put blinders on. When I was a small child, we lived in a farming community, and I would see mules out in the field, and they would have blinders on so that they could not be distracted looking from side to side. And that's what we need to do in our rural communities. Sometimes we need to put those blinders on to achieve the vision that we have for our community. And then you have your organization yourself. I found out through the years as being a mayor that many times your organization took on the personality of that local leader. If that local leader was combative, many times that local governing body became combative. If your local leadership was that person who could have that vision and explain that vision and get people to work together, then most of the time the county commissioners, city council members, whoever they might be, they would adopt that vision. Now, in your organizational structure, one of the number one things that you must do is instill values in that organization. I truly believe that if you instill the right values in the people that work for your organization, your chances of success go up astronomically. And I'm talking about, we talk about values, and you can sit there, and if somebody asks you, name a value that you think is important. And there's several things that usually come to mind. Everybody says, honesty, trustworthy. They want someone that is dependable. Well, those are all great values, but the local leader of that organization, number one, must have those values that their employees can readily see. Instill those values in your organization, and again, your chances for moving forward grow up dramatically. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about collaboration, and I know that's one thing that is very, very difficult to do. That's to get everyone on the same page working together. Man alive, sometimes as local leaders, we wonder, is anybody going to work together, or do we just have a group of cave people out there, CAVE, and that is citizens against virtually everything? Well, when you're in leadership positions, there's some cave people out there, and that's part of the process. And as my dad used to say, to be a leader, the higher the flag goes up the pole, the stronger the wind blows. So that goes with the position. But if you can have collaboration, and I know in my experience as being a mayor, that most every good thing that we did in our community had to be a collaborative effort between county government and city government. Number one, financially, individually, neither one of us could do a lot of the things that we wanted to do. But if we came together, saw that there was a spirit of cooperation and collaboration, then most of the time we could succeed at what we wanted to accomplish. And I mentioned the collaboration. You have partners. You're not on an island alone. You've got to work with your state partners. Your state partners are invaluable in helping you plan and achieve. And then you've got your federal partners. So I guess another word for collaboration is build that team. You've got to have a team that's together, that has the vision and has the passion and wants to work together to make good things happen. Now, I know you're listening and say that's easy said, hard to do, and that's exactly right. But in future broadcasts, we won't talk about collaboration and maybe some keys in working together. And then in your organization, you've got to have trust. You absolutely have to have employees that trust each other. You have to have employees that trust the leadership. And again, most of that time, that is done by example. So you instill the values, you instill the trust, and then you have that spirit of collaboration, and all that goes into building that strong foundation. I cannot express enough, though, how important leadership is in putting all the pieces together, and especially in building that strong foundation. Again, I have seen communities that I thought could be highly successful, but with poor leadership just never seemed to accomplish what they wanted, and more than that, needed to accomplish for their community. You know, what we have to understand, it's not about me. It's about the people that we serve. And it's that servant leadership, and we've got some folks that are excellent, scholars on servant leadership that we're going to have on our program in the future. So I just hope this effort to produce these podcasts creates some confidence from rural communities that good things can happen in your community, that you can celebrate small successes. And you know, small successes lead to larger successes. So I hope these podcasts absolutely are beneficial to you. And again, I can't stress enough as we begin this endeavor that I want to hear from you. I want to hear from you on subjects that you would like to hear us talking about, your comments, your maybe some examples of some successful projects in rural areas. And we would like to get those folks on and talk to them, pick their brain a little bit, and just see what has made them successful. Again, our contact is RuralStrong@gmail.com. Now, this is our initial podcast, and I'm going to tell you what's coming up in our next 2 or 3 podcasts. In the first one, we're going to talk about a real success story about local leadership, how local leadership in a small, rural West Tennessee community worked to put together what is known as a mega site in rural West Tennessee. And this was a site that was focused on large manufacturing, primarily automotive manufacturing. And the trials and tribulations that the local leaders went through, but they had that spirit of perseverance. They kept on task. And so in our first podcast following this one, we're going to be talking to a person who was very much involved in the local leadership and seeing how local leaders work together for the good of the community. Then we're going to follow up about once they actually had their site in place. And again, you know, you can't recruit from an empty shelf. So you actually have to have something to show site selectors, companies, whoever it might be. And this is what happened in this rural community. They thought big, they had a vision, and then they went out and recruited. So we're going to talk about the recruitment of the largest one capital investment in the history of rural West Tennessee. This was the recruitment of Blue Oval City, which is a collaboration between Ford Motor Company and SK Innovation. It is a very interesting story about how these two large companies came together and picked a rural site in West Tennessee to build their state-of-the-art manufacturing facility. And then in the podcast following that, we're going to talk about a gentleman who is really leading the economic development efforts in that rural community now and the challenges they face. You know, you recruit the company and they project 5,000-6,000 jobs that are going to come to this manufacturing facility. What happens in the local community? You know, it affects your education. It affects your emergency management systems, your infrastructure. What do you do about workforce? What do you do about housing? You've got all, you know, once you've caught the big fish, what happens next? So we're going to lead you through this. We've got some real interesting professionals coming on, and we hope you join us for our podcast. We will be dropping a podcast. Our plan is a new one each week. We hope you follow us, that there's something that is said that can help you in your local economic and community development efforts. Again, let us hear from you at RuralStrong@gmail.com. And this is Joe Barker. Till our next podcast, have a good day. Thanks for joining us on Rural Strong. If you found this helpful, share it and follow the show for more insights from rural leaders making a real difference. Until next time, stay rural strong.